A vast desert under a blazing sun. The sand begins to ripple unnaturally as shadows of alien ships sweep across the dunes. A deep, resonant hum fills the air. They came without warning, towering ships slicing through the skies, their machines ripping into Earth's deserts for resources they thought were unguarded. A colossal alien warship deploying massive drills, glowing energy beams piercing the sand. Suddenly, the desert erupts, towering sandstorms forming into humanoid shapes. The Sahara shimmered under a relentless sun, its dunes stretching endlessly into the horizon. Then the sky changed. The still, searing air vibrated as shadows blotted out the sun. The first of the Sci-Fi ships descended, sleek and metallic, their engines emitting a low hum that resonated through the sands. 1,000 years of conquest had taught the Sci-Fi Dominion one lesson: resistance from primitive worlds was futile. Captain Vale Carwatch surveyed the desert below from the bridge of the Eminence, his sharp golden eyes reflecting the desolation. "Prepare extraction protocols," he commanded, his voice calm but firm. "This desert holds the resources we need. Begin immediately." Across the Sahara, dozens of smaller ships broke away from the command vessel, drilling into the sand with relentless precision. To the Sci-Fi, this was a lifeless, barren wasteland, a perfect prize for exploitation. But something stirred beneath the surface. Dr. Elena Carter was no stranger to the desert. After years studying its harsh beauty, she thought she understood its secrets. But as she stood on the edge of a dune, camera in hand, watching the alien fleet darken the sky, she realized how little she knew. She had come to investigate an anomaly, a sudden, massive sandstorm that had appeared out of nowhere, obliterating satellites and shifting entire dunes. Yet now, as alien machines burrowed into the desert, the storm seemed like the least of her concerns. She crouched down, running her fingers through the sand. Felt different, warmer, almost alive. Her thoughts were interrupted by a deep, resonant rumble. She looked up, her heart pounding as the horizon began to twist and blur. A massive column of sand erupted into the sky, swirling with unnatural force. One of the alien ships faltered, its engines choking on the fine particles. The sandstorm moved as if guided by unseen hands, enveloping the ship in a blinding vortex. Elena scrambled for her camera, snapping photos as the ship disappeared beneath the storm. The sound of screeching metal echoed through the air, followed by silence. Moments later, the sand settled, leaving no trace of the vessel. "What the hell was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. On board the Eminence, alarms blared. Captain Carwatch stared at the display, his jaw tightening. The feed from one of the drilling sites had gone dark. "What is happening down there?" he demanded. "Unconfirmed anomaly," his second-in-command replied. "We're detecting massive energy surges below the surface. It's interfering with our systems. Deploy reinforcements," Carwatch ordered. "This world will not defy us." But even as his forces regrouped, the sand began to move again. The desert itself seemed to rise, swirling into spirals and waves that struck with precision, targeting the Sci-Fi ships one by one. Elena stood frozen, watching the desert come alive. She had seen sandstorms before, but this was different. The patterns in the sand were deliberate, almost intelligent. As she backed away, her foot struck something, a fragment of rock etched with strange geometric symbols. She picked it up, her mind racing. The markings were similar to those she had seen in ancient desert caves, drawings dismissed by her peers as primitive art. But now she wasn't so sure. Another rumble shook the ground. The sand shifted beneath her feet, forming shapes: an eye, a spiral, a jagged line. Elena's heart raced as she realized what she was seeing. The desert wasn't just alive, it was watching. From above, the Sci-Fi fleet reassembled, their plasma weapons charging for a counterstrike. Carwatch's voice rang out across the command center. "Destroy this anomaly. Leave nothing standing." But the desert had already decided. The invaders had come for its treasures. It would give them its wrath. The United Nations emergency session crackled with the sound of overlapping voices. World leaders sat around a massive circular table, eyes glued to the live feeds showing alien ships swarming Earth's deserts. The Sahara, the Mojave, and the Outback, key regions, had become war zones overnight. What had seemed like a resource grab now looked like a losing battle for Earth. General Ryan Stokes stood at the center of the room, his uniform crisp, his expression unyielding. "The alien fleet has focused exclusively on desert regions, ignoring our cities and infrastructure. This isn't an invasion in the traditional sense. They're harvesting." Footage flickered on the central monitor. Alien machines burrowing deep into the sand, emitting strange energy pulses that disrupted the surrounding terrain. Then came the storms. Sand twisting into violent, towering vortexes, swallowing Sci-Fi ships with precision that defied natural explanation. "This isn't normal weather," Stokes continued. Our drones have recorded patterns that suggest the storms are targeting them. It's as if the desert itself is pushing back. Dr. Elena Carter, sitting on the sidelines, couldn't hold back any longer. She stood, gripping a stack of documents. That's because it is, she said, her voice clear and firm. Heads turned. A few murmurs rippled through the room. Elena took a deep breath. I've spent my career studying the Sahara. The storm patterns we're seeing have no precedent in recorded history. And it's not just storms, look at the symbols forming in the sand. She held up images of intricate geometric patterns. These match ancient markings found in desert caves. They aren't just random. They're a language. Are you suggesting the desert is alive, Dr. Carter? Asked the skeptical diplomat. I'm suggesting there's an intelligence at work, Elena said, her voice rising with urgency. These patterns have appeared before, thousands of years ago, according to archaeological records. The Sci-Fi's technology has triggered something ancient, something we don't understand. If we don't figure out how to communicate with it, we might all be in danger. Above the Sahara, the Sci-Fi fleet recalibrated. Captain Vale Kerwich watched the tactical displays, his patience wearing thin. Why do these storms only target us? He muttered, pacing the bridge. Preliminary analysis suggests a localized energy field beneath the surface, a technician reported. The storms are amplifying it? Kerwich scowled. This is a primitive world. Its inhabitants barely understand basic physics. Whatever force this is, it isn't theirs. He turned to his war council. Deploy planetary disruptors. If the ground itself is the enemy, we'll tear it apart. Elena's heart sank as she watched a new feed from the Sahara. Sci-Fi warships began deploying massive, cylindrical devices that hummed ominously as they activated. The sand trembled violently, rippling outward like a disturbed pond. They're trying to destroy the source, Elena said, panic creeping into her voice. General Stokes crossed his arms, his tone grim. If they destabilize the region, it'll trigger catastrophic effects. Entire ecosystems could collapse. Climate shifts, dust storms that last for decades. They'll kill the desert and they'll kill us along with it. Elena grabbed her notebook, flipping through pages of symbols. She stopped at a drawing that mirrored what she had seen forming in the sand. It's a test, she murmured. Stokes raised an eyebrow. A test. The patterns, the symbols, it's trying to communicate. It's not just defending itself. It's testing whether we're a threat like the Sci-Fi or allies. Far below, the sand began to pulse, glowing faintly with a golden light. The disruptors faltered, their vibrations distorted. Alien machines collapsed into sinkholes that seemed to form beneath them on command. The storm's fury escalated, tearing through the alien fleet with unprecedented precision. Elena stood transfixed, the room around her dissolving into background noise. It's alive, she whispered, her earlier suspicions confirmed. The desert wasn't just pushing back. It was deciding the fate of the planet. The helicopter's engine whined as it descended, buffeted by the swirling winds of the Sahara. Below, the landscape was a patchwork of devastation and eerie beauty. Alien wreckage jutted from the dunes like skeletal remains, while strange geometric patterns spread across the sand, glowing faintly in the waning sunlight. Dr. Elena Carter sat stiffly in her seat, gripping her notebook. The rhythmic pulse beneath the sand, the heartbeat of the desert, had only grown stronger. Set us down near the last known location of the Sci-Fi command ship, she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Colonel Ryan Stokes, seated beside her, gave a curt nod. We'll secure the area, but if things go sideways, we're pulling out. Fast. The helicopter touched down, and the team disembarked into the searing heat. The air was thick with an electric hum, a vibration that seemed to emanate from the ground itself. Elena adjusted her scarf, her gaze fixed on the horizon where the sand seemed to ripple like water. This place is wrong, muttered one of the soldiers, scanning the area with his rifle. Stay sharp, Stokes barked. We're not alone out here. The remains of the Sci-Fi command ship were scattered across the dunes, twisted metal shards glinting in the sun. Elena crouched near a fragment of hull, brushing away the sand to reveal strange organic patterns etched into the metal. This isn't damage, she murmured. It's growth. The sand did this. Stokes frowned, standing over her. What are you saying? The desert ate their ship? It didn't just eat it, it's repurposing it. Adapting, Elena said, her voice tinged with awe. Before she could elaborate, a deep rumble shook the ground. The team froze as the sand beneath their feet began to shift. Movement, a soldier shouted, raising his weapon. The dunes ahead collapsed into a massive sinkhole, revealing a network of tunnels glowing with a faint, golden light. The vibrations intensified, the rhythmic pulse now audible, a deep, resonant thrum that seemed to resonate in their bones. We need to move, Stokes said, his tone urgent. Elena ignored him, stepping closer to the edge of the sinkhole. The symbols she had been studying were etched into the walls of the tunnels, pulsating in time with the sound. She felt a strange pull, as if the sand itself was calling to her. "This is it," she whispered. "The sand heart. It's below us." The Sci-Fi weren't finished. Overhead, the remains of their fleet regrouped, deploying smaller drones into the desert. One hovered near the sinkhole, scanning the tunnels. Its presence triggered an immediate reaction. The sand erupted in a violent spiral, enveloping the drone and dragging it into the depths. The golden light intensified, spreading outward like ripples in a pond. "It's protecting itself," Elena said, stepping back. The Sci-Fi pushed too far. They awakened something ancient. Stokes grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the edge. "We're not sticking around to find out what it does next." Before they could retreat, the sand shifted again, coalescing into towering humanoid shapes. The figures moved with purpose, their forms shimmering like mirages in the heat. "They're communicating," Elena realized, her voice trembling. She raised her notebook, sketching the symbols that began to appear in the sand around her. The humanoid figures stood motionless, as if waiting. Elena knelt, tracing one of the patterns on the ground. The moment her finger completed the shape, a flood of images filled her mind. Ancient battles, alien invaders, and a vast, pulsating consciousness deep beneath the earth. She staggered back, gasping. "The sand heart isn't just alive, it remembers. And it's testing us to see if we're worth saving." As night fell, the team set up camp near the sinkhole, their floodlights casting eerie shadows across the dunes. Elena worked feverishly, her fingers smudged with sand as she deciphered the symbols. "It's giving us a chance," she said to Stokes, her voice urgent. "But if we fail, it'll see us the same way it sees the Sci-Fi. A threat." Far below, the sand heart stirred, its pulse growing louder. The desert wasn't waiting for answers, it was deciding whether humanity deserved to survive. The desert roared with fury. Massive sandstorms surged across the Sahara, their ferocity ripping through the landscape. The Sci-Fi fleet, regrouped and reinforced, descended in full force. Plasma shields shimmered over their towering drills and extractors, each designed to pierce deep into the planet's crust. Above, attack ships circled, raining down precision strikes in a desperate bid to suppress the relentless desert. Dr. Elena Carter stood at the edge of the sinkhole, watching as the sand heart responded with escalating violence. Towering columns of sand moved like sentient creatures, targeting Sci-Fi war machines with unnerving precision. A ship overhead faltered as a spiraling dune twisted upward, shattering its hull and dragging the wreckage into the sand below. "It's defending itself," Elena said, her voice barely audible over the chaos. Colonel Ryan Stokes stood beside her, his face shadowed by the glow of the explosions. "Defending is one word for it. That looks more like vengeance to me." The ground trembled as another Sci-Fi drilling machine collapsed, swallowed by the shifting earth. Around it, the sand moved in deliberate, almost fluid motions, carving intricate symbols that pulsed with golden light. "What's it trying to tell us?" Stokes asked, his tone a mix of frustration and awe. Elena knelt, tracing one of the glowing symbols with her finger. "It's not just fighting, it's sending a message. It's testing us, seeing if we understand what it's protecting." Above, the Eminence, the Sci-Fi flagship, hovered ominously. Captain Vale Kerwich watched the battlefield from his command deck, his frustration mounting. "This resistance is unnatural," he growled, pacing as his war council relayed updates. "This planet should have been subdued days ago. Our analysis confirms that the energy field beneath the surface is sentient," a technician reported. "It's coordinating the storms and the attacks." Kerwich's claws scraped against the console. "If it's alive, then it can be destroyed. Deploy the subsonic disruptors. Tear it apart from within." The Sci-Fi's next wave began. Disruptor devices, cylindrical and sleek, were launched across the desert. Each one burrowed into the sand and emitted a low-frequency hum, designed to destabilize the very structure of the sand heart. The response was immediate. The sand erupted in violent waves, rising to meet the new threat. Entire dunes transformed into living entities, crashing down on the disruptors with crushing force. The devices crumpled like paper, their vibrations silenced. "Elena, we're running out of time," Stokes said, his voice tight. Elena worked furiously, sketching the symbols she saw in the sand. The patterns were becoming clearer now, forming a message she was beginning to understand. "It's asking us to choose," she said finally. "To prove that we're different from the Sci-Fi. That we don't just take without understanding." "And how do we do that?" Stokes asked. "We stop fighting," Elena said. "Completely. No weapons, no resistance. We show it that we can listen." Stokes stared at her, incredulous. You're asking me to tell every soldier out there to stand down while an alien fleet bombs this planet into oblivion? If we don't, Elena said, her eyes locked on his, the Sandheart will destroy them and us. It doesn't see us as allies yet, Ryan. It sees us as part of the problem. The Sandheart's pulse grew louder, resonating through the air. Around the sinkhole, the sand began to glow brighter, the symbols shifting into an intricate web of light. Stokes raised his radio, his jaw tight. All units, this is Colonel Stokes. Stand down. Pull back immediately. I repeat, cease all hostilities and retreat to safe positions. A wave of disbelief rippled through the comms, but his tone left no room for argument. Slowly, the human forces withdrew, leaving the battlefield to the Sandheart and the Sci-Fi. Above, the Eminence prepared its final assault. A massive energy weapon extended from its underside, its core glowing a searing red. They're charging up something big, Stokes said grimly. Elena's gaze shifted to the glowing symbols in the sand. The Sandheart was waiting, its power coiled like a predator ready to strike. It's testing them too, she said softly. The weapon fired, a beam of pure energy tearing through the desert. The impact sent a shockwave rippling outward, shaking the ground beneath their feet. For a moment all was still. Then the desert roared again. The sand surged upward, engulfing the weapon in a tidal wave of golden light. The beam dissipated, swallowed whole by the living dunes. The Sci-Fi flagship shuddered as the sand climbed higher, its tendrils wrapping around the ship's hull. Elena, Stokes said, his voice low, I think it's made its decision. As the Eminence struggled against the rising tide, Elena traced one final symbol in the sand. The light around her flared brighter, the pulse of the Sandheart slowing to a steady rhythm. The desert was giving them one last chance. Hovered precariously, its hull battered by waves of sentient sand. The colossal Sci-Fi warship groaned under the strain as the desert fought back with relentless force. Dr. Elena Carter stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the glowing patterns spreading across the dunes. The rhythmic pulse of the Sandheart reverberated through her bones, a slow, deliberate beat that seemed to mirror its judgment. It's waiting, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Colonel Ryan Stokes glanced at her, his face taut with tension. Waiting for what? For us to prove we're different, Elena replied. It's testing us, to see if we deserve to share this planet. Stokes stared at the battlefield, where human forces had retreated to a safe distance. Farther ahead, the Sci-Fi's disruptors continued their assault, vibrating with a low, eerie hum. Despite the Sandheart's immense power, its movements were slower now, as if conserving its strength. If we fail this test, Elena continued, it won't just destroy the Sci-Fi. It'll destroy us too. Inside the Eminence, Captain Vale Carwage paced the command deck, his patience long gone. Status report, he barked, his voice sharp. Shields at 30%, his second-in-command replied. The energy field is interfering with all systems. We can't maintain this assault much longer. Carwage slammed his fist against the console. Unacceptable. This world is nothing more than dirt and primitives. We will not leave empty-handed. A technician hesitated, then spoke. Sir, the sand, it's reacting to us directly. It's as if it knows what we're doing. Carwage's eyes narrowed. Then we give it no choice. Prepare the core destabilizer. The technician froze. But Captain, if we deploy that weapon. We end this now, Carwage snapped. Even if it means the annihilation of this desert, this planet, and whatever wretched force opposes us. On the ground, the sky darkened as the Sci-Fi's core destabilizer activated. A deep red glow illuminated the Eminence, casting long shadows across the dunes. The device pulsed with deadly energy, its vibrations rippling through the air like a warning. What is that? Stokes asked, his voice grim. Elena's face paled as she watched the energy build. It's a planetary weapon. If they fire it, it'll destabilize the Sandheart, and the entire region. Maybe the entire planet? The ground beneath them began to tremble more violently. The glowing patterns in the sand flickered, their pulse becoming erratic. The Sandheart was reacting to the Sci-Fi's final gambit, its fury mounting. Elena knelt in the sand, her fingers tracing the patterns as quickly as she could. We need to stop them, she said. But we can't use force. The Sandheart won't accept it. What do you suggest? Stokes demanded. Elena looked up at him, her eyes blazing with determination. We surrender. Fully. We pull every weapon, every force, and every human presence out of this conflict. We show the Sandheart we're capable of trust and respect, even when faced with annihilation. Stokes hesitated, his military instincts warring with the logic of her plan. Finally he raised his radio. All units, this is Colonel Stokes. Immediate retreat. Cease all operations and fall back. No exceptions. The human forces withdrew entirely, leaving the battlefield empty except for the Sci-Fi and the Sandheart. The desert grew eerily still, the storms calming as the Sandheart focused its attention on the invaders. Above, the core destabilizer reached full charge. Carewhite's face twisted with triumph as he prepared to fire. Now we see who truly controls this planet. The moment the weapon activated, the Sandheart struck. The dunes surged upward in a colossal wave, engulfing the eminence and its weapon in golden light. The core destabilizer's energy dissipated harmlessly into the sand, absorbed by the living desert. The Sci-Fi ship buckled under the weight of the Sandheart's power, its hull collapsing as the sand tore through its interior. On the ground, Elena and Stokes watched in awe as the Sci-Fi fleet was dismantled, ship by ship, until nothing remained but silence. The desert settled. The glowing patterns in the sand dimmed, their pulse slowing to a steady rhythm. "It's done," Elena said softly. As dawn broke over the Sahara, the Sandheart sent one final message. The symbols in the sand shifted, forming an intricate web that stretched across the horizon. Elena knelt, tracing the shapes with her fingers. "What does it say?" Stokes asked. Elena looked up, her expression solemn. "It's a promise and a warning. It'll let us live, but only if we honor this planet. If we break that trust..." She didn't finish. She didn't have to. The Sandheart retreated into the depths, its presence fading but not forgotten. Humanity had passed the test, but the weight of that responsibility would remain. Far below the surface, the desert watched. And it waited. The Sahara was quiet again, its vast dunes glowing softly under the rising sun. Where once there had been chaos, now there was stillness. The scars of the battle, the shattered alien machines, the remnants of the Sci-Fi fleet, had been swallowed by the shifting sands, leaving no trace of the invaders. Dr. Elena Carter stood on a dune, her notebook clutched in one hand, her gaze lost in the horizon. Beside her, Colonel Ryan Stokes adjusted his cap, glancing uneasily at the desert. "Hard to believe it's over," Stokes said, breaking the silence. Elena nodded slowly. "For now." Stokes turned to her, frowning. "You think they'll come back? The Sci-Fi?" "No," Elena said, her voice steady. "Not them. They won't dare. But others might." She knelt in the sand, running her fingers through the grains. The desert felt alive even in its stillness. The Sandheart's presence had receded, but Elena could still sense it, like a faint hum at the edge of her thoughts. "It's watching us," she said. "Not just the deserts, all of us. Everywhere. If we forget the promise we made, it won't hesitate to act again." Stokes folded his arms, surveying the expanse before them. "Do you really think humanity can change? That we'll honor the deal?" Elena stood, brushing sand from her hands. "We have to. The Sandheart gave us a chance. It's up to us to prove we deserve it." In the weeks that followed, the world reeled from the events in the deserts. The Sci-Fi invasion, though brief, left an indelible mark. Nations that had once bickered over borders and resources now faced a stark reality. Humanity had nearly been wiped out, not by alien weapons, but by its inability to live in harmony with its planet. Elena became a voice for change. Her research on the Sandheart and its connection to Earth's ecosystems was published widely, sparking a global movement. Governments redirected funds from military budgets to environmental restoration. Desert regions once seen as barren wastelands were protected and studied, revered as sacred spaces. But not everyone believed. Whispers of doubt grew in some corners of society, claims that the Sandheart was a myth, a convenient story to justify political agendas. Elena ignored the skeptics. She knew the truth. Deep beneath the Sahara, the Sandheart rested, its consciousness spread across the deserts of the world. It had seen civilizations rise and fall, watched as they burned bright and consumed themselves. Humanity had been given a chance, but the Sandheart remained patient. In the stillness, it recalled the Sci-Fi and others before them, those who had tried to take without understanding, to conquer without respect. Each had been tested. Each had failed. For now humanity had passed. But the Sandheart's memory was long, and its judgment absolute. If the time came when the promise was broken, the desert would rise again. And next time there would be no test,